Hello, everyone, and welcome to APS Webinars. The title of today's webinar is International Students and the APS Response to the Pandemic. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS Webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Today's presentation features Francis Slakey, Chief Government Affairs Officer, and Amy Flatten, Director of International Affairs at APS. Slake and Amy will be sharing resources and information on what APS is doing to support the needs of international students during the COVID pandemic. The discussion will be moderated by Raju Gambhire, graduate researcher at the University of Texas, Austin. After Slake and Amy finish the presentation, the remainder of the program will belong to you for our question and answer session. Because of the number of people attending this webinar, we are only accepting text questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel located on the right side of your screen. You may submit questions through this panel at any time during the webinar, and we will answer all of your questions at the end. And we'll do our best to cover all of the questions you submit, but apologize if we are unable to cover everything. We'll do our best. Finally, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event and will also be made available on the webinar homepage, which is part of our summer webinar series. We ask you please to allow 48 hours for the video upload. And lastly, we encourage you to complete the survey upon exiting so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. So now let's get started. I'm going to introduce our speakers. Dr. Francis Slakey received his PhD in physics in 1992 from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. In addition to his technical publications in the field of condensed matter physics, he has also published widely in the popular press, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and Scientific American, and has given more than 150 talks, including to Google, TEDx, and the U.S. Strategic Command. He has served in advisory positions for a diverse set of organizations, including the Council on Foreign Relations, National Geographic, the Creative Coalition, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He served as the Upjohn Lecturer on Science and Public Policy at Georgetown University, where he founded the GU program on Science in the Public Interest, and is a fellow of several associations. Dr. Slakey became the 28th American to summit Mount Everest in an unguided environmental expedition that was the subject of the movie Beyond the Summit, described in his international best-selling adventure memoir, To the Last Breath. He is the first person in history to both summit the highest mountain on every continent and surf every ocean. In recognition of his adventures as part of the 2002 Olympic Games, he carried the Olympic torch from the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Dr. Amy Flatten is serving as Director of International Affairs of the APS, where she develops international scientific exchanges, collaborations, and partnerships with physicists around the globe. Prior to joining APS, Dr. Flatten served for 5 years with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she managed international science and technology initiatives involving government, academia, and industry on behalf of the U.S. President's science advisor during both the Clinton and Bush administrations. Prior to joining the federal government, Dr. Flatten held private sector positions with high-tech corporations, including AT&T Solutions and Booz Allen and Hamilton. From 1995 to 2005, she also held a faculty position with the Johns Hopkins Part-Time Engineering and Applied Sciences program, where she received the 2000 Excellence in Teaching Award. The conversation today will be moderated by Raju Gambhire. Raju is originally from Nepal and is currently the secretary of the APS Forum on Graduate Student Affairs. He holds a master's degree in electrical engineering and data science from South Dakota State University. Recently, Mr. Gambhire pursued his PhD in nanoscience and microsystem engineering at the University of New Mexico, and currently he is at the University of Texas at Austin as a visiting research student. All right, so that's it for introductions. Slake, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Crystal. So at APS, we are absolutely aware of just how badly the global physics enterprise has been impacted by coronavirus. And over the past couple of months, APS has focused most of the work of the Office of Government Affairs on how to get the physics community through and beyond the pandemic. So let me start by just saying a bit about the approach that we've been taking in the Office of Government Affairs. It's a triage approach. So we chose to work first on the most immediate needs of the physics community, and then we focused on the next most immediate needs, and then the next most immediate needs. And in each case, we worked in a way that would bring about the swiftest and most effective positive response to the problems. So taking that triage approach, it was very clear to us what we needed to do first. And the first thing that we did, the initial priority of APS, was to ensure that grad students and postdocs continue to be supported by their federal grants. So we partnered with the Forum on Graduate Student Affairs, and many of you are members of FGSA. And working with FGSA, we sent out a grassroots alert to their members, who then urged Congress to maintain salaries and benefits of grad students and postdocs who were supported by federal grants. Hundreds of letters were sent in. I heard directly from the Department of Energy that our grassroots campaign spurred them to a swift response. And within 2 days of us sending out that alert, we got confirmation from the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense that all of them were extending grant support for postdocs and graduate students. So that was positive. It was a quick response from the agencies. It was stimulated in part by the grassroots work of FGSA. So terrific work by FGSA leadership and members. But let me add one more thing to this, that if you are aware of any PIs who are not extending federal grant support to their grad students and postdocs, please bring that to my attention right away. So that was the immediate need, making sure that grad students and postdocs continue to get supported. Then, after we addressed that general need, we turned to more specific issues. So we got very concerned about how COVID was impacting international grad students. And there's several groups of students that we're concerned about, and I've listed them all here. So the first group are the graduate students who return to their country to ride out the pandemic, and they're going to be needing a visa process to return back to the US in the fall. Another group are grad students who have lost, anywhere from 4 to 8 months of research time, particularly if you're an international grad student working in an experimental lab. That lab shut down. So now it will likely take you more time to get your PhD, and as a result, you may require an extension to your F1 visa. Another group we're concerned about are international graduate students who remained in the US, but who are now facing financial strain. And then there are all the new students who need their visa processed in order to come to the US for the first time in the fall. So we were concerned about all those groups, and the concerns of those 4 groups of international students became a focus of our conversations with Congress and with the administration. And in fact, we put those concerns down in writing. We worked with the APS president, Phil Buxbaum, and on April 13th, we sent this letter to members of Congress that listed all of our concerns and the requests that we had. Then, to amplify our voice, we mobilized our APS members in the US and asked them to make these same requests of Congress themselves. And as of today, more than 2,300 APS members have actually done that. They've contacted Congress, and they are urging Congress to take the actions listed in this letter. So let's get to the specifics. There's some very specific requests in this letter that relate to international graduate students. So working with my colleague, Amy Flatten, who you're going to hear from in a moment, we've been in contact with the US State Department about the need for consulars to prioritize the processing of student visas. And as a result of our conversations with the State Department and the conversations others have had with the State Department as well, we've confirmed with staff at the State Department that consular officers are expected to prioritize student applications first among all non-immigrant visa processing. Now, be aware that there's a backlog right now, and also be aware that every consular is required to make American citizen services their #1 priority. So that won't change. They have to do that first. However, after that, among all of the non-immigrant visas that they have, consulars are instructed to make the processing of student visas their top priority. So what that means for you is that there will certainly be a delay as other needs are addressed first, American citizen services, for example, and then they also have to clear the backlog. So plan ahead, get your visa request into the system as soon as possible. And my colleague Amy Flatten is going to say more about this in a moment, and she'll be able to direct you to resources to make that as smooth as possible. So that action actually of prioritizing students among all non-immigrant visas will certainly help 3 of the groups that I listed on that previous slide. It's going to help all of you who are now returning to the country after you've ridden out the pandemic. You return here in the fall. It should help you process your visa. It should help grad students who've lost time because their lab has been shut. They might need an F1 visa extension. It will help you. And it will certainly help all the international grad students, the new international grad students who will be coming here for the first time and need their visa processed. But there's that one other group that we're very concerned about, that one other group of international graduate students who I mentioned. And we're very concerned about the international students who remained in the US but are facing financial strain. So let me say a little bit about that. So the Office of Government Affairs advocated for the inclusion of student relief funds in the federal funding response to the pandemic. And the CARES Act that was recently passed by Congress and signed into law by the president provides approximately $6 billion in funding specifically targeted as a relief fund for students. Now, that support is at every campus in the country, but it's up to each campus to determine how those funds are going to be dispersed. Now, there are very strict requirements on which non-US citizens can actually access those funds. However, many campuses have now set aside support for those international students who are not eligible for CARES funding. So for you, if you're facing financial stress, say you had a TA or an RA shift for the summer and that's no longer available, what you should do is immediately contact your graduate student representative in the student government. Check if you're eligible for CARES Act funding. If you are not, ask how to access any campus relief funds for students. Now, if you don't have an accessible student government representative, you should directly contact your dean of students or your chancellor, and they can tell you how to apply for those relief funds. Now, let me turn to something. It was a very recent announcement by the Trump administration that you may have heard about. On April 22nd, the administration made what's called a proclamation, and here it is. It's that news of the proclamation may have been reported to you in a very alarming fashion, depending on where you get your news. And the reason for that is just prior to that proclamation coming out, President Trump tweeted about this, and some news outlets interpreted that tweet to mean that international visitors to the US might be affected by this proclamation. Now, let me assure you that the direct result of this proclamation does not impact international graduate students. It only impacts individuals outside the US who are currently seeking green cards. So we've had APS lawyers look at this very carefully. I can assure you of it. This does not impact your ability to get an F1 visa or to return to the US for your study. Now, you may have heard about a particular clause in this proclamation, and it's at the bottom of this slide, and it says that there's now a review of non-immigrant programs. That's something that Amy and I will be monitoring very closely. But again, this executive order does not impact your coming to the US for your studies. So all my comments so far have focused on the immediate issues that international graduate students face, but I want to at least spend a few moments describing two other activities that address the longer term needs of international graduate students that are quite important to the full recovery of the physics enterprise from the pandemic. So we know that many graduate students have lost anywhere from 4 to 8 months of research time as a result of COVID. At the same time, during those 4 to 8 months, as a result of the fact that many grad students were continuing to be supported by the grants are actually being spent down, but the lab shuttered, so the research isn't getting done. So for those grants, the PIs and the graduate students are going to be unable to meet the project scope, even if they're given extra time, because there's not enough funds to carry out the research. So in those cases, APS is pushing for cost extensions to complete the work. So to be clear, in addition to more time, we're advocating for additional funding in order for the work to get completed. So this is very important. It's not just about research, it's about the people, it's about you, it's about graduate students. Our advocating for cost extensions would enable you, funded under those grants, to have the support necessary to complete your PhD research. And let me close with one last very high priority advocacy activity for APS. We've been working with members of Congress on legislation that would enable international students who are applying for a visa to be able to declare an interest in staying in the US after they complete their degree. Now, at the moment, as many of you know, US law requires that when you apply for a visa as an international student, they're going to ask you to demonstrate that you are not going to stay. We have heard from many graduate students how challenging that can be. It's a senseless burden from our point of view, and we're working to try to have that removed. And at the same time, we're trying to establish an easier path to getting a green card should you want to stay in the US after you complete your degree. So both of those provisions I just mentioned, and only those two provisions, are in legislation that we've encouraged. It's called the Keep STEM Talent Act. It's not law yet, but we're working to try to make that happen. So those two things, cost extensions, Keep STEM Talent Act, are the longer term activities that we're working on to help recover from the pandemic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amy Flatten.
Crystal? Yeah. Oops. Thank you, everyone. Slake, thanks so much. And I want to follow up on Slake's comments with, again, a longer term view of why the APS cares so much about international students and why we're actually having this webinar to give you some resources. And a lot of people don't realize that the APS membership is almost 20%, 25% in fact, coming from outside of the United States. We're very proud of this, and we very much want to continue to be of service to physicists across the globe. And I get this question a lot: how come, and what does APS do for physicists outside of the United States, and why should we belong to APS? So I'm going to touch a little bit on that, and also hopefully give you guys, the international graduate students out there, some resources that can be of help to you if you're not already coming to study in the United States, you know, to help you along the way. So some of you may be considering coming to study in the United States, and some of you may have, be somewhere in the process of applying to graduate schools here. And let me give you a resource that I think is extremely valuable. And we will talk a little bit in detail about each one of these. But the State Department very, very much wants international graduate students to come and study in the United States. And as such, they have put together a website that is full of wonderful, wonderful information. And it's called EducationUSA. And we didn't even realize this for some time, but they're advising centers across the world for students and graduate students and postdocs at all levels to get some valuable information. And there are fairs and forums where you can talk to people in person. And let me give you an example of one of the things that we're talking about. So EducationUSA has over 430 international student advising centers in more than 175 countries and territories, and you can see that on your screen. But look at the top bar there in blue. It's soups to nuts, gives you information on all aspects of the journey from considering coming to this study in the United States to actually being accepted by a university. So for example, taking the first step, a lot of you might think, what does this mean? How do I do this? On the EducationUSA website, it shows you how to research your options, how to finance your studies, completing your application, and on and on and on. And so you'll see the last one there, preparing for your departure. Well, the challenge here, and a lot of you might face this, is you've been accepted to graduate school, you are excited about coming, you have applied for your visa, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting. So what do you do in that circumstance? So here again, APS can help you. I'll point you to the APS webpage. Check out this link. Here I point you to a wealth of resources on not only the application process. We have links to the State Department website where you can see how long it would take to get your interview, how long it would take for the average application. And if your visa is delayed, go to this website because you have visa help links that help guide you through the process of what to do if your visa application is delayed. And likewise, if you're on this webinar and you're in the United States and you want to travel outside the United States, we have guidance there for you as well. And this might be a little bit ahead of your time, but for those of you who are students, one day you're going to be organizing meetings in the United States, perhaps, and we have resources there to help you as well. So I talked a little bit earlier about the number of APS members that live outside of the United States. And one of the things that we have come to appreciate is how difficult it has been for our international members to engage with APS. So let's say, you're thinking about coming to the United States, you apply to graduate school, you finally get through the visa process, you are enjoying your first year, your second year, your postdoc in the United States, and someone comes to you and says, hey, are you going to the APS March meeting? You think, what? APS? I don't live in the United States. What does APS do for me? So here I want to assure you that APS wants very much to engage with physicists worldwide. And this is not about just beefing up our membership numbers. This is one of the values of our organization. And just recently, the APS Chief Executive Officer appointed a task force of high-level leaders across the international physics community to guide the society on how we can better serve physicists outside of the United States. they came up with 4 key goals, and look at goal number 3. Expanding international opportunities for young physicists and guiding young physicists for international careers. This is something that we're going to be focusing on extensively in the upcoming years. So yeah, you're like, yeah, okay, great. And I'll see an article in APS News and I'll join APS for a year because student membership is discounted, yada, yada, yada. But what's the meat on the bones here? What are you really actually gonna convey to me and do for me? And what are some of the things that you offer? So let me give you a sneak peek. It's impossible right now, it seems, for physicists outside of the United States to understand, what does APS do for my community? So we have put together a web tool, which we haven't even launched yet. It's soon to be launched, but I wanted to show you guys. And here you can see at the bottom a number of links, and basically every continent will have a link, and certain countries as well. So you can click on that link and see, what is APS doing specifically for me? What is APS doing for my community? So let me give you an example. And again, this is still in process, so we don't have all of our countries up, but let me give you an example of one that we do. Canada. So take a look here. This is how APS is engaging with physicists in Canada. It gives the number of members, the number of fellows, but look at all of the panels. Look at the icons there, the tiles. Almost every single one of those is an offering for graduate students. A graduate student physics conference, a graduate student travel award, a distinguished student program travel award, a conference for undergraduate physicists. So please be aware of this. We are going to launch it within, weeks, a couple weeks. And I encourage you, once you see this, to keep visiting this and really understand that APS truly wants to serve you. So that being said, we don't presume to live in a bubble and decide what your community needs from us. We really welcome the chance to be of help and want to hear from you. Consequently, I've put up all of our contact information, mine and Slake's and a couple other people who are standing ready to help you as well. So that's all I have. And with that, let me turn it back over to Crystal so she can start with our questions.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. That's really great. So Raju, do you want to go ahead and lead us in the Q&A from the audience?
Yeah, sure. Cool. So yeah, so my first questions goes to the Slack. And so as you mentioned, there's a lot of international students currently having issue with their status right now, and those students who recently graduated and get the work authorization but could not go for the job. So is there any plan from the government, or you heard anything from them? They're planning to extend their optical practical training or the status for a while, like?
So Raju, that's a very tricky issue. And I had mentioned earlier in my presentation that there was this proclamation from the Trump administration that has initiated this review of non-immigrant visas. Part of that review will be OPT. And something that Amy and I are very carefully watching is whether there will be any kind of restrictions placed on OPT. As of right now, there are not, but it's something that we're looking at very closely.
Okay. So the next question I got here is, is there any action planned to support international grad students who came to the USA to work at a university as in J1 visa as a visiting researcher, scholar, and are getting close to the end of their program, but also cannot work on their project right now? So any plan for those scholars the government planning or APS working on?
Oh, pardon me, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Slake.
So I'd say, we're concerned about all of these visa categories. I mentioned the F1 in particular because I know the focus of this conversation has been with graduate students. And so we have done a lot of work around the F1, but we're also concerned with OPT, with the H1B, with the J1 and visiting scholars. But if the question is, have there been any new restrictions placed on the J1, I can say as of right now, there have not been any additional restrictions placed on the J1. And Amy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, is your question that, the research has been delayed and so the duration of the research project is going to be longer than the validity of the J1?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very difficult issue. The National Academies of Science has an international visitors office, and there's a link to that from the APS webpage that I gave you. And consequently, there needs to be some priority given, of course, to these scholars renewing their visas. And as Slake said, it's something that we're paying attention to and that the entire science community is aware of. There's a coalition of organizations in the Washington, D.C. area that are working together on these issues. And while we don't necessarily have a immediate answer to what that solution will be, we can say that we are working to communicate these concerns to the State Department, and the State Department is very receptive to these concerns and, quite frankly, are working hard to help our science community. So stay tuned, and please know we appreciate the concern that you may have in this regard. Everything's been delayed. So that's
Wonderful.
part of the conversation.
Cool. So the other questions, I think it goes to the Slake. As you mentioned, so the CARES Act, so does the CARES Act only apply to international students, or can any student apply for funding through it? Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, there are restrictions on international students accessing funding in the CARES Act. It's very strict. However, in response to the need that campuses have recognized that international students need the assist too, what many campuses have done have set up their own relief funds so that they can actually assist those international students. So my suggestion to any of you who are facing this financial strain is get in touch with your student government first, your graduate student representative, if you have an active student government. If not, then get in touch with the dean of students or with the chancellor and ask them how to access those funds. The first question can be, are you eligible for CARES Act funding? It's very restricted, so it's unlikely that many international students will be able to access the CARES fund themselves. But as I mentioned, the campuses have responded by establishing their own independent relief funds for just that purpose.
Wonderful, cool. So another questions I have for maybe for Amy can answer this one, I think. So does APS offer any resources, those applying for H-1B visas? Any kind of resources APS have or working on, kind of?
Sure, we have the information on our visa website. We don't provide direct assistance for visa applications for H1s. Nonetheless, we are on the policy level concerned about H-1B visas, but they're beyond the information provided from our website. We don't really have the channels to intervene on individual cases for H1.
Okay, cool. So good. So the next question I would like to ask to the Slake, and so many international students is still planning to apply for a visa and come to the United States. What suggestion particularly you have for them? Like they're thinking they're gonna get good opportunity in the United States, but what is your suggestion for them? Like
Well, so the immediate suggestion, I'm sure Amy will support this too, is get this started as soon as possible. So we know that there's going to be a backlog in processing visa applications. Now, the work that we have done with the State Department is to get the assurance from state that they will prioritize student visa applications among all the non-immigrant visas. That's a relief that the students can know that their visa will have high priority by the consulars, but it's still going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time, and so because of this backlog. And so the most important thing you should do is get the process started as soon as possible. Amy, you may want to add to that.
Yeah, I put the link back up for the APS Visa website. Again, I would strongly encourage you to go to that website. There are links in there to help identify how much the wait time might be for an interview. And of course, during the pandemic, in-person interviews are not possible. But in some consular offices, they're doing virtual interviews or even waiving interviews. Be aware that most scientists go through an extra review of their visa called a mantis review, and that's typical. That's a delay for extra examination for certain science and technology fields that are on a commerce controlled list. And that's not a problem. It's just an extra step that is typical for most scientists. So a lot of times the processing times reported for the State Department include tourist visas, not necessarily student visas or business visas. So allow much, much, much more time than maybe the State Department websites indicate. I also want to point out under Visa Help on this website gives you a link to the National Academies International Visitors Office webpage. And there you'll be guided on how to report a visa delay, visa application processing delay. And at first glance, it just looks like a survey for statistical purposes, but it gathers information on your application that's pending by a certain number of days that the Academy gives the guidelines on. But for those who can input their information into that survey or that database, they report your pending application to the State Department every week. And it doesn't ensure expedited processing, but it makes sure your application is not falling through the cracks. So again, I encourage you to visit this Visa Help section of our webpage should you encounter any delays.
Wonderful, cool. So that's nice. So another questions I have is, so it is really possible to obtain a student visa when applying abroad? An example of that, this is in fact has worked. No student at Norwegian University has been applied. I think this refers to the Slakey presentation, these questions.
You know, Rajiv, you'll have to ask it again. I'm not quite sure I followed what the questioner has in mind. And Amy, if you do, feel free to jump in.
So I think what I understand these questions is, can a student apply for the US student visa when they apply, when they're traveling abroad? When they're traveling abroad, if they can apply like from their home country. For example, if I'm traveling to the UK, can I apply US visa from the UK? Something like that.
Amy, I'm going to ask you to step in on this one. You might know the requirements here.
Yeah, I think that's, I think what we see across the country, across the globe, is that you may have an undergraduate student that's accepted to a graduate program in the UK, and from the UK, they want to do a postdoc or a second degree. They've done their master's in the UK and they want to do their PhD in the United States. And there shouldn't be any difficulties with that. Again, I would also point you to, the EducationUSA website that can give you some of this information as well. but that's understandable. That's standard. Yeah, the best and brightest students are often the most internationally mobile, so there should not be any problem with that. But you can
Cool.
check these resources as well. And again, I'm really impressed by this group. They should here, you can find an advisory center in just about every country, and you can send them an email or even go in person once we're able to do things in person to an event. So I want to commend them and offer that up as a resource as well.
Cool. Wonderful. So yeah, that's good. Next questions I have for the Slake. So as you mentioned the OPT, so for those students who really doesn't know what is OPT, can you clarify a little bit about on that one?
Sure. So if you completed your PhD, your next step in the process may be optional practical training, where you spend some time, either you continue to spend it at a university or you spend it in industry. It would serve, in a sense, as a transition step so that industry could evaluate whether to extend an offer of an H-1B to you. So it often serves as this transition between your PhD and whatever your next step, if it's employment in the United States, whatever that next step might be.
Cool. So they can apply for the OPT to work for a while in the United States, you mean, right?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, this is something we're very concerned about because of the recent proclamation. It looks like optional practical training may come under much more intense scrutiny. So we're Amy and I and other organizations are watching very closely to see what might happen to that program. But as of right now, that option still exists for students. Yes.
Cool. Wonderful. So you already mentioned in your presentation that so the grad student or the international student who lose their support from the PI or from the university, and you mentioned you can contact them. So what could be the better, person or the place to contact for them, to the university, in the university or outside the university?
Sure, they can always alert their chancellor, but the reason that I made the offer is because the agencies that I mentioned, and the science agencies, have all told PIs that they can extend their federal grant funding for students. They can keep that funding going. So if a student has been terminated from a grant as a decision of the PI, that's what I'm saying. Let us know, and I can alert the agencies to that happening.
Cool. Wonderful. So the next questions I want to ask to the Amy. So from your presentation, so it seems like the website, like for the visa policy, it's trying to modify, like for the international student. Do you think it will come in effect like very soon, or it will take time for a while, the new policy?
The visa website is up and running now. Absolutely. The only thing that I was referring to that isn't up and running is our cool tool. This thing here where you click on it and it's a one-stop shopping for wherever you are in the world on how APS can help you.
Cool.
Yeah, but the visa website is there for everyone right now. Feel free to access it.
Wonderful. Cool. So the next questions I have is, so how can I use the resources of the national academies? Anyone can answer?
Yeah, I can take that one. On the APS website, under Visa Help, will bring you directly to the page of the national academies to report any visa delays.
Cool. So wonderful.
Raju, I had a question.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
I'm breaking in here. Amy, so I think this is a really cool resource that you all have. Can you give an overview of the types of resources that people might expect to find on those individualized pages for each country?
You're talking not the Visa website, but this tool?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a snapshot of about half the page. And yeah, a lot of people are sitting there thinking, APS, it's across an ocean. They don't really care about me. And this tool is to show not only do we care about you, we're engaged with physicists in your country and we want to offer more and do more. So first of all is, just some background information. And this is just an example for Canada. So for example, Canada, and I picked Canada because it was one of the pages done, but there are going to be resources for anywhere in the world. And when I say there are going to be, it's done. We just have a couple tweaks to do before we launch it. But to your question more specifically, you see on the right, APS members in Canada. Okay, there's some interesting information there. And you can see, oh, wow, I have colleagues in my country engaged with APS. But I point you to the left, programs and opportunities. You click on the FGSA Travel Award, click on that, and it brings up application information. The Forum on International Physics, the second row of tiles, Distinguished Student Program Travel Awards. You click on that, it brings you to information on how to apply. So this isn't just background information on, isn't it great that we do nice things or have done nice things? This is actual living information for you to engage with the APS and take advantage of its offerings. And then you can, as we scroll down, you see meetings and events, and these are upcoming meetings that we've pulled from our own APS meetings calendar to focus on the meetings in your region. And then you scroll down and you have publications from APS that are of interest to physicists in your country. And the screenshot didn't allow me to have the whole page. And then you scroll down below that and you have information on journals and the number of published authors from your country or your region in APS journals. And then you scroll down below that and you find out, well, of the people in my country, they're not all senior scientists. Hey, there are a lot of students in my country, and give some statistics there. But here's what's most important. This is just the beginning. If I scroll up to this page, this blue box is our real overarching goal, to deepen our international engagement across all of the society's activities. And putting that in plain English, what that means is all of the things that APS is doing now, we want to make sure it's accessible to physicists in any part of the world. So the things that we're doing for women in physics, we want to have on this website so you can click on a box and access it. The things we do for career mentoring, Crystal, you and I are working on this. We want it, and it's available in a box on this page so that people can access it. So this is the real vital pulse of how we can engage with any physicist at any level, anywhere in the world. And not just information, but resources on how you can access those offerings.
Cool. So yeah, I have another questions for any of you, I think you can answer. So one questions I got, can you tell me about the financial support for international student? I think they're asking about what they can get in the United States besides the TA and RA, I think, in terms of the financial support during their universities.
So I had mentioned one option that's available to students, and that's campus relief funds. So if students find themselves under financial strain right now because they had an RA or a TA-ship over the summer, which is no longer available, that's a concern that we have. It's a concern that campuses have, that those students are somehow stranded now without adequate resources. And so that's why I mentioned the relief funds that are available at every campus. And again, those relief funds come in two forms. One is the CARES Act, but that's highly restricted. So the other is just the campus's own independent relief funds that are established, intended to address particularly this need. So those are the funds that are available should a student be under financial strain right now. But there may be additional resources, Amy, that you want to bring students' attentions to.
Sure, and where the international office can be of help is not necessarily in your studies per se, but engaging with other physicists through the ability to attend APS meetings. And here there are going to be there are a number of ways to do that. And the FIP Distinguished Student Program Travel Awards, that's one example. And as we get closer to the March meeting and there's more certainty that we can convene in person, there'll be information on our site on the different travel awards offered by the variety of APS units to bring students to the March and April meetings, where you'll have the chance to network with senior physicists and young physicists from across the world. We have at our March meeting, 30% of our attendees come from outside of the United States. And we want to make sure that people who want to come to our meetings are available to come to our meetings. Likewise, stepping away from the financial resources, we hosted a very successful virtual meeting for our April meeting about a month ago. And consequently, we hope to expand our ability to bring the APS meetings to you instead of requiring you to travel an ocean to come to us. So we look forward to more and more opportunities to engage.
Oh, so which means, I mean, the relief fund, can any student can apply, or just a grad student, or just undergrad student, is that for all, or just for a specific group of people?
For which, Raju? For
the relief fund you just talked about?
So that's something that the student has to check their local campus.
Okay.
Like, if I can break in, I think the question is CARES available for citizens? Is it just for international students, or is it for any graduate?
No. So CARES is available for domestic students, and it's highly restricted in its ability to provide funding for international students. There are some international students who fall under certain categories that may be able to access those CARES funds. But that's why I've been pointing out the additional resources the campuses are making available in relief funds, precisely for this reason. They know they have students that won't be able to access CARES. So it begins with you contacting first, your graduate student government representative is your best means to getting information about how to access those funds. If you don't have a student government that's very active, then in that case, you want to contact your dean of students or chancellor directly and ask how to access those funds and what you're eligible for.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it's an important question. I think it's a concern for many of the students. So how does the online courses affect the visa status for international student, or how can I protect my F1 visa status doing the online courses? There's some rule, you need to take like courses, not online, you need to go for a class, something like that. Do you have any idea what's the government plan or the official planning for that?
So if the student is still enrolled as a student at the university, then they're still an active student, still on their F1 visa. But perhaps the questioner had something else in mind when they asked that.
Raju, are you talking about those people who maybe have been accepted for the fall and aren't able to necessarily come to the United States because there's still COVID restrictions, or their university isn't open and the students are only able to access classes online?
Yeah, maybe this applies to this summer as well, I think.
I would say in that case, the student should contact the international office of their university. They will be the best resource on how to navigate that particular issue. And if they have any problems contacting that office or knowing which office to contact, then please feel free to drop an email and we'll help try to make that connection for you.
Cool, cool.
Okay.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Krista.
Well, I think maybe it's time to kind of wrap up. Again, I just want to thank everyone, Raju and Amy and Slake, for being here and answering these great questions. And again, you know, if we didn't get to your question, we apologize, but you can certainly follow up by sending an email to webinars@aps.org. We can certainly forward questions to the speakers for comment. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the recording of the video from this presentation will be emailed to you within 48 hours. If you registered, you'll get an email from the GoToWebinar Citrix email, and it will include a link to get to the recording. And we're also going to be posting a copy of this recording on YouTube. It's on the APS YouTube channel and also on our summer webinar series homepage, which I hope that you will take advantage of. If you haven't signed up for that, I'll type the URL in the chat. go.aps.org/summer-webinars, and it's going to be a whole series of webinars that we're doing on different professional development topics. We just did one last week, building your professional pathway during COVID. Some just general advice on how to keep your professional development moving through this really challenging and confusing time. So this webinar will be there, and if you join this mailing list, you'll get a notification every time there's another webinar coming. We've got a lot of really great stuff planned. So, and lastly, in order to help us continue to develop these quality webinar presentations, we really would love to get your feedback. When you leave this webinar, there will be a short survey. It's only 4 questions. It'll take you a minute to fill out, but we really appreciate your feedback on today's presentation. Okay, this wraps up today's event, and we hope you'll join us again next time. American Physical Society, copyright 2020, all rights reserved. Bye, everybody.
So long, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Raju.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.